Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Rachel Rutberg with ITSA America, and I would like to welcome you to today's member webinar titled Strategic Outreach for Connected and Automated Vehicle Projects, presented by Utah Department of Transportation. Before I hand things over, I just wanted to go over some quick logistical items. As you may have noticed, all participant lines are muted today, and that is to avoid any background noise for our speakers. However, we do encourage you to provide any questions or comments you may have in the Q&A pod, which you will find on the lower part of your screen. If there is some time at the end of the webinar, our speakers will be able to address the questions received. I also wanted to mention that today's webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be posted to the ITS America website. So with that, I will now turn things over to Elizabeth McMillan, Director of Strategic Communications at Utah DOT.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm really excited because I'm here with fellow transportation lovers. I would even go so far as to say most of us are probably transportation nerds. I am just happy because we are all so lucky to have careers in a field where the work that we do has so much power to influence well-being among communities and individuals. And like anything that's powerful, we need to be really intentional that we're using that power for good. Can we go to the next slide? Now, I don't know if you can see it, but on the right up at the top, it says exactly what our mission statement is. Because at UDOT, we want to be crystal clear to our employees, to our partners, and to the general public about what we're trying to do. Our mission statement is very concise, and it is to enhance quality of life through transportation. So all of us here, we transportation nerds, know that it's true that we can cause positive change. And it's not just that we can, we're all trying every single day to do just that. Now, the beginning of my transportation career was in public involvement. So I was lucky enough to receive a lot of public comments and feedback about the work that we do. And I'm guessing that many of you have too, even if it's just from neighbors or people that know that you work in the transportation industry. And they're not always really positive. When you hear what people have to say, you might think that they do not believe that we are all committed to improving quality of life. There was a study by an economist named Danny Kahneman, and what he was looking at was how people felt about the pleasantness of different activities that they do throughout their days. You are probably not going to be surprised about what the top ranked activity was. It was intimate relations. And you might also not be surprised to find out, but disappointed to learn that commuting ranked dead last. We're talking about after cleaning, people would literally rather scrub toilets than commute. At the same time, I want to make you feel good. The value of our work is not completely underappreciated. So we do research every year, and we did a survey last year where we asked people about whether they thought transportation influenced their quality of life. 80% of them said yes, transportation impacts their quality of life. So that's the first part. But then we wanted to know, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? 76% said that the impact was positive. So even if people don't love the way they feel while they're sitting in traffic, they do see the value in the work that we do. So as we're looking at these disruptive technologies and also just new technologies in transportation, we can see that we are perfectly positioned to communicate even more about what we're doing. And in addition to providing that value that they already see, we also need to think about their user experience. I think we can safely say from the research we just talked about that they're not enjoying what's happening when they're sitting in their cars, but what can we do to change that? Technology, as it's developing today, will absolutely change that experience, no question. So now we should be thinking, how can we leverage those changes to make it so that people are comfortable in this new transportation world and that they're actually enjoying it? So how do you think about changing customer experience, user experience? You talk to your customers. Can we go to the next slide? So I alluded to a survey. Each year, UDOT conducts a variety of surveys, and we also hold focus groups so that we can have dialogue with transportation system users. That's drivers active transportation. It's a multimodal system. The cardinal rule of communication is know your audience. So what we're trying to find out is Who are they? Where are they? What do they care about? What do they believe? And how do they communicate? Also, how do they want us to communicate with them? Let's go to the next slide. I want to talk to you a little bit about what we found. So in an annual survey that we do every year, so that we've got some baseline information and can see how things are evolving, we've got some standing questions about the future and transportation technology. I'm happy to report that 73% of Utahns think that UDOT is doing a good job providing a quality transportation system. 59% believe that we're doing well at planning for the future. I, of course, would love to see that number higher, but 59% is pretty good. And for a government agency, we are crushing whatever is happening in Washington. So feel good about that. Now, we also conducted research specifically about public attitudes toward autonomous vehicles and other emerging transportation technologies. I'm not going to tell you about that right now because no one likes a spoiler, and Lisa is going to get into that in a few minutes. But what I will tell you is that the research that we did and the findings from it helped shape our communication strategy over the past couple of years. And it's also provided insights for how the traveling public wants to interact with their system. One other thing that I think is worth noting, it comes up time and again, no matter the topic of our research, which is that the American relationship with our cars and with our roads is deeply personal and emotional. It represents our freedom and our autonomy. So we were super curious to understand how drivers would feel about getting inside a car where that autonomy was handed over to an inanimate object, the car itself. Actually, in the name of research, I think we should do a little poll among us. I'm curious to hear how you feel about this. So we're going to have a poll. I'll give just a second. I think that, yeah, that should be up now. So the question is, have you taken a ride in an autonomous vehicle? All right, more than half of you have. We've got an early adapting group here. That's great. All right, so no matter how you answered that question, though, we were pretty close to half. Transportation technology is unquestionably revolutionizing our experience and shaping the future. And it's essential to the success of transportation. The demand on our system is constantly growing, basically no matter where you live. And in Utah in particular, we're the fastest growing state in the country. Our population is expected to double in the next 30 years. And so even though our legislature has been really forward thinking and supportive of infrastructure, our program is quite big. The truth is we are not going to be able to keep pace with the growth of the population. We often say that we can't pave our way out of population growth, out of traffic. And also we don't want to. We started out with a discussion about well-being and quality of life. And if you ask pretty much anyone what that perfect quality of life looks like, they would not tell you that it's roads everywhere. We want green space, we want neighbors, we want people, we want connectivity. So keeping that in mind, technology becomes even more important as we move forward because we need to be able to make the most out of the system that we have. Technology supports every single goal we have at the department, from safety to mobility to preserving the condition of our infrastructure. We're constantly innovating in this area, thinking about how technology can advance things in all three of those areas, which are our strategic goals at UDOT. And they are the goals that we share as a transportation community across the country. In fact, we've even received some really great US DOT grants recently for us and some of our partners, including other states, to advance technology in all of these areas. And I am now going to turn it over to Lisa, who is more familiar with the details of this work, and she's going to share some of that information with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that excellent welcome. And I hope everyone joining us today is just as energized and excited as I am for this transportation technology discussion. This is such a fun time in our industry. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and we're so glad you're here today. We've been working towards a one UDOT philosophy for a number of years at the Department of Transportation, and the strategic goals and emphasis areas that Elizabeth mentioned are a great way for us to reflect on our values that are in every project. Next slide, please. We've been working on transportation technology related projects for many years, but we officially created our transportation technology group in early 2018. When we were brainstorming how to message for the group and really how to incorporate a lot of those strategy elements that Elizabeth mentioned, we really wanted to answer the question that was most important to us. Why would we formalize transportation technology as a whole group? And these are essentially the pillars that we came up with. They're really still a foundation for our group, and they've helped us to prioritize our projects and make very important, valuable connections. You'll notice that the outreach and growth is its own pillar, and this is very strategic and important because we all know, if there's anything that you take away from today, if the public and your elected officials don't understand a technology or don't trust something, they won't fund it and they certainly won't use it. Next slide, please. Communication strategy is really a critical component to a successful project. And I'll take a minute to talk about some of the resources that UDOT has as an agency for construction, maintenance, and other projects. But when we were envisioning the outreach of the Transportation Technology Group, we were really thinking about our key audiences. There's obviously legislators, colleagues from other states, academia, private sector partners, media, public sector partners. The common denominator with all of these groups are the traveling public. And we launched an official website earlier this year after a pretty exhaustive planning process to share details about our projects and provide an easy conduit for peers and those other groups that I mentioned to be able to contact us. Next slide, please. The website, of course, is a fantastic tool. The website for that is transportationtechnology.utah.gov. And I'll pop that into the chat box later in our discussion when we do the Q&A portion. But to do the day-and-day ebb and flow of projects really sometimes needs a deeper dive. And UDOT developed the project outreach planner that you see on the right side of your screen there to assist our communications consultants in determining level of effort for project outreach. And sometimes we've heard that engineer project managers really need to have the value of good public involvement demonstrated to them before they're fully on board spending resources and time on public involvement. And I mean, that makes total sense. Engineers and a lot of people in our transportation industry are very data-driven. That makes sense, and the checks and balances are, of course, completely appropriate there. Now, the strategy behind each group within UDOT and each project within each group varies. There's, of course, a level of kind of hierarchy there. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. And when it comes to our automated vehicle shuttle project, we had a robust communication strategy that was complete with a crisis communication plan, which we used a couple times. I'm very glad that we prioritized the creation of that crisis communication plan. And we're starting up a few other projects now, and the strategy for outreach is much smaller due to the nature of those projects, but it's always a good idea to envision what your goals are and what you're looking to share on a project by project basis with your different audiences and key stakeholders before you start out. Next slide, please. Okay, we've talked overall strategy. But what about the tactics? How do you refine a big goal like share the benefits of transportation technology with every citizen in your state? I mean, that's kind of a monumental task there. How do you break that down into more action-oriented tactics? For the automated vehicle shuttle project, we had an editorial calendar where we brainstormed in advance what pieces of information we wanted to share in a way that we were informing and educating without being pushy or without being too technical. The AV shuttle project has been a great resource for us to pull from for other projects when it comes to refining our tactics. And really, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. You can use those resources that you've previously developed to help you determine level of effort and your audiences and overall outcomes and metrics for each project. Next slide, please. Perfect. The area of driverless cars and cars talking to each other and the infrastructure around them is relatively new in comparison to some other responsibilities a lot of our agencies have been working on for a number of years, a number of decades, like bridge building and traffic signals. The baseline understanding for transportation technology projects really varies widely from community to community. And in the fall of 2018, right after we formally organized our transportation technology group, Elizabeth talked before about the importance of focus groups in our business. We did conduct some focus groups to understand the sentiment in our communities in Utah. We know that it's probably vastly different than the citizens that live around an M city, for example, or in the neighborhoods around Carnegie Mellon University or other places in the country that are really advanced with transportation technology. And we really need to meet people where they live as part of our strategic outreach for these projects, especially when it comes to a topic that may take the driver's seat away from their futures. And Elizabeth hit the nail on the head. Some people are really excited about this, and some people are opposed to it. And their opinions change every time there's an incident that occurs or every time one of their family members expresses an opinion on the subject. And driving is really very much an inherent American quality, and it's a pastime. This is a sensitive subject. And what we heard in the focus groups was not necessarily positive or negative. I would say it was a little disheartening. Everyone in the focus group said, they shrugged their shoulders and they said, it's inevitable to have driverless cars. And we said, we want you to be excited about it. We want you to be on board with this. We want you to understand it and really just fully support it. And what we really wanted to hear was that the folks were excited and interested, but the initial impression at the beginning of the focus group was essentially higher than it was at the end of the focus group, which is something that doesn't really happen very often. We had our work to do after those focus groups, and we really educated the participants through our time together. And it's a bit unusual of an outcome, but it was an excellent way for us to start our messaging and outreach strategies to set us up for success and determine those metrics and those tactics. Next slide, please. We have a variety of other projects besides the automated vehicle shuttle pilot, but that project was certainly a huge level of effort for us in Utah. And we learned so much from a project management and a deployment and integration standpoint, as well as the outreach side. And we do talk a lot about it. It was a really exciting project for us. And if your agency is embarking on a project like this anytime soon, we're very happy to share our lessons learned and help you out. This project was unique for an automated vehicle deployment because we moved the shuttle several times to different locations around the state. And we hosted over 6,000 passengers in the 18 months that the shuttle was in the state of Utah. And we had a great amount of media interest on the project, including from our then Lieutenant Governor, now Governor Cox. And we started the outreach side of the project much later than we should have, but we overcame a lot of hurdles pretty easy by having an excellent, cohesive, and very knowledgeable and dedicated public information consultant. There were several different components of this project. Some of what you see on your screen here are some of the invitations that we put together for key stakeholders. We wanted it to look very clean and very kind of futuristic and exciting, but still very much have that kind of public agency component and brand to it. And one of the press events that was essentially a kickoff for the project was in early April of 2019. And it was an unseasonably cool day in Utah. We actually had some big snow flurries that were a little bit challenging for us on the testing track where we had the automated shuttle deployed. And we just had an excellent representation from our leadership in the state and at both the Utah Transit Authority and the Utah Department of Transportation, very cohesive, and it really made a very good impact about the importance of this technology and why we're moving that way as an organization and as a state. Next slide, please. The goals of the project were pretty simple. Determine that first mile, last mile crux and conundrum that we've been dealing with for most of our careers. See how this could fit into our transportation system in Utah. And most importantly, number one on the list, expose the public to the technology and get their feedback. We had a few opportunities for course correction and additional messaging, which you simply must consider these opportunities, by the way, not challenges. It's an opportunity always. Based on popular social media posts from outside of our project, our then Lieutenant Governor posted what you see on the right side of your screen there, just a kind of a commentary. He's very interested in this technology, and we're lucky to have him as a very big supporter of this technology because of the improvement and support that it brings to the economy, as well as the safety that it brings to our roadways. But he essentially posed this question on social media, and a lot of the people that were following our project essentially said, hey, well, how do you feel about this? I mean, it's going to be great, but if all of the buses that the Utah Transit Authority is running right now are going to be automated shuttles at some point, then what about all of those bus drivers, and how do you feel about that? We really had the opportunity to influence the conversation through our project and demonstrate the value for these shuttles and automated vehicles and essentially connected vehicles as well. But this is a very important reminder that the conversation is happening, whether or not you're there to participate in that conversation or have an opportunity to influence or mitigate the conversation. It's really pretty important. One more thing before we move forward on the slide. We did have some feedback from the Shuttle Ambassadors, is what we called them, the folks from the Utah Transit Authority that are typically customer service related in their jobs, were on hand when we were running the shuttle at all of these different locations. And they had an iPad survey for everyone to fill out if they chose to fill it out once they were done riding the shuttle. And we asked a few questions similar to the question that we asked all of you. Is this the first time you've experienced an automated vehicle? How do you feel about it? Do you think they're safe? The percentage of people that felt safe and who had a more positive attitude towards AV technology after this ride was very, very high. 98% said they felt safe and 95% said they had a positive attitude. And we really tried to decipher that positive attitude part. Why wasn't it higher? I mean, 95, you can't get 95% of people to agree on hardly anything. So we were very happy to see those results. But how could that have been higher? And how could we use our outreach strategies for these projects to essentially inform and educate and get that number even higher, tick that number up just a little bit? Next slide, please. We have so many exciting projects in the works at Udot, and we are part of the ITE Complete Streets initiative. There's going to be a lot of connected vehicle components of that. There is a Federal Highways Work Zone data exchange that I'm sure a lot of you are probably participating in as well. We're really excited to be working with our central communications and central construction folks on that data work zone exchange project to see how much data we can get into the vehicles when it comes to work zones and making sure that we can reduce or eliminate crashes in work zones. One of the most exciting parts of that work zone data exchange project is the data standardization. It's a really important topic for us to be having. And with some general guidance coming out of US DOT as far as the technology agnostic, but guidance towards continuing to deploy automated and connected vehicle technologies, we really do need those data standards to be able to help us all work together seamlessly and deliver to the traveling public a really cohesive transportation network, especially across state lines and boundaries. We're continuing to work on the data ecosystem project, and we are partnered with Panasonic on that. You may have noticed we're using some ATC MTD money for part of that data ecosystem project. And phase 1 and phase A were complete last year. We deployed some roadside units as well as some onboard units in several of our vehicles within the Department of Transportation. And it's a fantastic real-time opportunity for us to know about crashes in seconds when it used to take us minutes. My background is primarily traffic management and traveler information. And to be able to have that component fed into our control room so the operators are able to engage in that and interact with that pretty much immediately after there's an incident is really fantastic. And of course, that helps us with traffic incident management principles and quick clearance and roadway safety and mobility. It's all there, and it's all really benefiting each other and really coming together very nicely. We're working on a fiber sensing project, curb speed warning, spot weather impact warning, and a lot of other cool stuff. We can definitely inform you on all of that that we're working on. Please visit our website at any time. I will pop that into the chat box as promised and see what we're up to and come out and visit with us. And I'm very excited for the day. I'll close and hand it over to Elizabeth now, but the graphic that you see on your screen here, I'm really excited for the day when we can add to this information sources on our annual survey. Where are you getting your information from? Apple Maps, Google Maps, VMS, DMS, social media. On the very end, between Waze and public meeting, I really want to add from my car, from my dashboard, from my car that's talking to other cars on the roadway, or from V2I or V2X technology. It's going to be pretty exciting. I think we're in a very fun time right now. Elizabeth?
Well, I'll close out by coming back to that idea of user experience, but applying it a little bit more broadly. We've talked about some of the great opportunities that we have because of technology, because of the ability that we're going to have to use data, because of artificial intelligence. But I think one thing that we need to make sure we don't lose sight of is we have these incredible applications for technology, but it's only as good as it is for the answers to the questions we ask. So the questions that we ask need to be about how these things help humans. How do they help communities? How do they help us facilitate equity? And so as we move forward with these technologies, I encourage you to sit down and think with a human-centered focus. So what is it like to use our system? And how can we make it safer? And then you start asking the questions, okay, well, we would need to have this data. We would need to know this about the curve geometry. We need to know where people are having trouble. Where do we see red light running? Those are all questions that can be answered with data, but they need to start with thinking about how we as humans use the system. Because yes, autonomous vehicles are absolutely coming, but that's going to require us as humans to think about how we can take that technology and use it for the greatest good. And I believe that we are now going to have a question and answer session. Before we do that though, Lisa, anything I missed?
Not that I can think of. I'm very excited to hear from the participants. And just FYI, if my niece or nephew end up popping up in the back of my screen, they're helping me today because they're 5 and 8 and they might not ever have a driver's license. So it's all going hand in hand. I love it. Okay, Rachel, I think we're ready for Q&A.
Perfect. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive into some questions we've received, and please feel free to send any more into the Q&A box as we go through. So our first question is, can you share the various AV surveys you used?
Lisa, I'm going to defer to you on this one for final word. But generally speaking, I would say my answer is yes. I think many of us in this field feel the same, which is we are all on the same team. And one of the benefits of technology is that we can work like a team pretty easily. So it was paid for by taxpayer dollars. It should be for general use. I don't know the mechanics of how to share it, but we absolutely will.
Yeah, absolutely. The final report that we put together for the AV shuttle project is probably a great resource. So head over to the transportationtechnology.utah.gov and click on the link for the AV shuttle pilot project. The final report is a good couple of hundred pages, and we made a very strong emphasis to ensure that we included all of the bells and whistles and the nooks and crannies of the outreach plan that we put together. And I believe that all of the survey questions are in there. A couple of different options that we had. We surveyed people via QR code on their phones. We had tablets available that I mentioned. And then we also allowed people, we had a lot of discussion about this before we offered it, but we also allowed people to take the survey on the avshuttleutah.com website after they rode the automated vehicle. And we thought about that, you know, what kind of data quality are we going to get back? And are we going to be able to determine fully if the person did ride the shuttle, or if they are supportive of the technology, or possibly trying to skew the results for whatever reason. And we really found that we got back a lot of very good quality data, and overwhelmingly positive, which was really pretty exciting. One of the things I'll mention, we primarily kept the shuttle in the Wasatch Front area, in the Salt Lake City area for most of the deployments, but we did take the shuttle down to St. George, Utah, which in the last couple of decades has primarily been kind of a retirement community. It's just about an hour and a half north of Las Vegas along Interstate 15. And we went to one of the transportation expos in St. George and had the shuttle outside for attendees to ride. And we thought that the attendees were going to say essentially, I've had a driver's license my whole life and I love driving around and seeing this beautiful countryside that we have. You're not taking my keys away and you're not automating my car. And almost everyone said, why didn't you do this 5 years ago? Which really speaks to the sentiment that we have behind this kind of technology. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and people are really looking forward to keeping their mobility, but not necessarily having to be the ones that are piloting their own vehicle.
Wonderful, thank you. Next we have, is the accident data coming from the RSUs live now? If so, can you expand on that?
And I believe you're speaking to our data ecosystem project. I will answer the question as if you're talking about the data ecosystem project. Yeah, we're really excited. We have some data coming back from the RSUs right now. We have basic safety message data, BSM data, and several other several other connected vehicle metrics. And the data is coming back, I believe, live through that data ecosystem portal. I don't believe that it is something that we are sharing at this point. I think we're still in the kind of investigation and data validation stages right now, but please ping me afterwards. And Rachel and Elizabeth, if you could go to the next slide, our contact information is there. And if you can't see my email, I can put it into the chat box there, but the information that we're getting back is really very encouraging. And one of the vehicles that we have an RSU deployed on also has kind of a trick button on the dashboard where we can essentially simulate a crash just by pushing that button. And we did a couple of live demonstrations for our Transportation Commission virtually back in 2020. And originally we were going to put our Transportation Commission in vehicles, drive them around this test loop that we have deployed by our Traffic Management Center, and allow them to essentially simulate the crash and see how quickly the data comes back to our control room. And we switched gears a little bit because of COVID, and we were able to do that virtually. We do have that recorded, so if anyone's interested in kind of seeing the inner workings of that, that might be something that we could share. I won't promise anything. I have to check with the project manager first and make sure that we're ready to share that. But it's a really fascinating system, and we're really encouraged by that data.
Wonderful, thank you. So great work getting the public to understand and provide feedback the vehicle side. Do you think they understand the value of infrastructure or a connected vehicle environment? If not, how could that be evaluated?
Elizabeth, I think that's all you, but
Okay.
I will preach before you get going and say, Making sure that you demonstrate the value by helping them to understand where their taxpayer dollars are going is so critically important. And I'm a communications person that's been working with engineers for almost 20 years. And there's so much value in being able to tell your story. And you really need that communication strategy part to make that cohesive. And I'll get off of my soapbox now and turn it over to Elizabeth.
All right, well, then I'll get on it now that you've stepped down. So I think one challenge that we have, one opportunity that we have in transportation is the baseline expectation is that it's going to work perfectly. You know, it's kind of like the cardiovascular system. You don't notice it at all. And then if something goes wrong, it's like really, really a big deal to you. So in that way, I think people do acknowledge it, but only when something is going wrong. So that's something that we have to think about constantly as we're communicating, because they're not necessarily thinking about the value of infrastructure proactively, but they do see that it has a big impact on their lives. So that's, you know, kind of the dichotomy there in terms of how people think about value. In terms of them understanding and believing in the value of connected transportation and connected infrastructure, this is another one where I think we need to do more research in this area. I could not answer that definitively, and I also want to know the answer to that question. One thing that we have found, though, that I think influences how we're going to need to communicate about this is that there's also an expectation that we can do more than we necessarily can. So everyone has seen The Italian Job. What is it, like a 15-year-old movie? And it shows just like green light after green light after green light. If you work in transportation, you know that that is not how it works. We're not sitting around with people who are pressing buttons and who can make it green light after green light without completely messing up the system. So I think that there's a belief that that we're more advanced than we are, and that there's a misunderstanding about what it really takes to get to the type of connection and cohesion that we want to have on the system. Now, that being said, I think that as we see the benefits for safety and convenience, as we start to implement connected technology and where you've got V2X, I think as people start to experience it, they will understand how different it is from perhaps what they imagine and how much value it will have for them. So I think in the meantime, we kind of just set the table for that as we do things like the data ecosystem pilot that we're doing in Utah, that we communicate a lot about how it's going, the truth of the status of where we are, but both the upsides and the potential gaps between what people thought we had and what we actually have, and then the potential value moving forward.
Wonderful, thank you. Our next question, what technology is being utilized for autonomous vehicles? LiDAR, cameras, other?
That's a very good question, and I would rely on Peter Jager, who's actually attending today. Hi, Peter. Peter's on our team with the Transportation Technology Group. I'll say from a very high level, I know that we are very much employing every proven technology on our roadways in an effort to combat fatalities and improve mobility. I know that the automated shuttle has several different sensors on it. LiDAR is one of them. And the RSUs and the OBUs, I can't really speak to the technology components of those. Peter, if you'd like, please feel free to pop into the chat box any kind of details that you have. But whomever asked that question, please feel free to reach out to us via email, and we can certainly answer that in more detail.
Thank you, Lisa.
I'll also just add to that too, that some of the technologies that we've been using, so like LiDAR is a really great example. We've been using LiDAR for at least 12 or 13 years so that we can have an inventory of our assets and start proactively planning for how to best manage it. More recently, we've been putting LiDAR onto drones, and in that way, we can make it safer for surveys. We get more accurate surveys, and now we're able to develop an XYZ mapping of not just our system, but also the terrain where we might potentially want to build. So as we take those technologies and use them in different ways, it just continues to open doors for what we can do.
Thank you. Were any survey results about citizen enthusiasm for connected infrastructure? And does UDOT have any plans to start building connected infrastructure in any of the cities that we will be using autonomous vehicles?
Elizabeth, do you want to start on that one? And then I can talk about the Orem project.
Yeah, I will just set it up really quickly. So the enthusiasm for connected infrastructure, I think, was implicit in some of the research that we did most recently. But as I mentioned, I think we're going to need to really drill down on that one with both quantitative surveys and then qualitative focus groups. I think that there's very little understanding among the general public about what that can look like. I think that particularly vehicle to infrastructure communication is a pretty foreign idea to most of the traveling public. And I also think that, and this is just world according to me, this is my hypotheses before we do research, but that there's also potential for a little bit of hesitation about V to anything just because of security concerns. I mean, this is a really common topic in a lot of areas, and there's particular hesitation about government having any kind of access. So I think that there's going to be some communicating that we need to do there. And back to what we talked about before we start communicating, we need to have a better understanding of how the public feels. And I think we're not there yet.
And to build on that a little bit, we do have phase 2 and phase B of our data ecosystem project that we're partnered with Panasonic on, deploying later this year in Orem, Utah. Orem and Provo areas are another one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in the nation. And I believe it was just rated as one of the best places to live in the nation. And we're really working with the local MPO and municipality to deploy several RSUs on their buses and their fleet vehicles. And we're really excited to have sort of kind of a concentrated deployment to be able to fully investigate and realize these benefits for mobility and for safety that we've been talking about. So stay tuned for that. I believe that there's a little bit of info on that right now on our website, but there will be more info coming out probably in industry publications later this year and early next year.
Thank you. So this was a great discussion on the pilot projects. 5GAA had released a white paper in a while back projecting that for agencies to equip roadways nationwide for CAV V2X nationwide, it will require a $180 billion investment. How do agencies plan to fund this initiative at scale? What are creative ideas around how to fund as an industry?
Elizabeth, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a little bit tricky to answer, partly because funding works so differently state to state. So in Utah, for example, we use very little federal funding. And my belief is that in this area, there's so much national work and coalition work that's being done in the CAV V2X space that there will be a national effort, a national plan. I don't know what that strategy is at this point. But then when it comes down to actual funding, it's going to largely be at a state level. And so you've got the at scale nationally, but then you've also got what's going to happen statewide, which is another challenge unto itself. And so I think that the creative ideas are yet to come. I think that there's also work that is being done right now to try to assess the value of what we're going to get out of that investment. Because in order for legislators who appropriate that money to get on board with making that kind of financial commitment, we're going to need to come to the table with a business case. And so my belief is that that groundwork is being done right now, and that that's the first step before we start putting together a plan for how to get that funding.
Right, and Elizabeth, I'm going to totally date myself here and say I was involved in early deployments of VMS, DMS back in the mid 90s, and we were asking ourselves the same questions then. Each deployment for each VMS, DMS was $500,000, maybe even more than that, to get the connectivity and the power. And now that it's up, what do we use it for? We weren't confident as an industry and as a profession in our travel times a lot at that time. And when taxpayers were driving under very expensive pieces of equipment and infrastructure that were blank, they were pretty upset about it. This has kind of been a crux of our industry for a long time, which is why I kind of specifically mentioned before, we're not just kind of deploying random and willy-nilly. We're really making sure that what we're deploying is as cohesive as it can be now with the information that we have and the funding that we have, but also that it's tested and proven before we're deploying. And I saw a couple of comments and questions kind of coming in about the state of our industry and how we are communicating with these vehicles. And we all know that cell phones back in the day were cost prohibitive, and now they're an integral part of everyone's lives. I think the technology is going to get less expensive, smaller, much easier to consume into our existing networks, and I'm pretty excited to see where it goes.
Thank you. We have a couple minutes for some more questions. How do you evaluate what new technologies to prioritize next, and where do public-private partnerships fit in?
Well, baseline, most important thing is we're going to be looking at how does this new technology support our goals of safety, mobility, and preserving infrastructure. So when we're deciding whether something is going to be worth the return on investment, it starts with what do we want to get a return on and in service of what? So that's going to be the starting point, is how much of a return on investment can we expect to see, and what are the outcomes that we can expect to see? Now, after that, and this relates to the public-private partnerships, there's also the element of what's available. So if we have the opportunity for a public-private partnership, even if it wasn't in what we had previously conceived to be our prioritized list, if it is expected to get us a return on investment toward advancing one of our strategic goals, then it comes into consideration, particularly with a public-private partnership. What you're going to see is that the private sector will be bringing forward an investment of their own. Like, that's the nature of a P3. And so when we have a chance to do a partnership like that, where we're going to be contributing kind of as an R&D partner, and then we've got the private sector also putting forward money in their own investment, then those are opportunities for us to say, okay, well, this wasn't necessarily on our radar yet, but we believe that this is going to help us get where we want to go. It's going to improve quality of life. So let's put together a business case and decide whether this is something that we want to move forward.
And we're a very data-rich organization at Udot. We have more data sometimes than we really know what to do with. And in the last few years, we've added data mobility engineers at our traffic operations center, and they're helping us to crunch the numbers on a variety of different projects. But having those metrics and being able to use those to investigate and demonstrate to your traveling public that there is value in this will absolutely kind of help you along in that way. So it's an exciting time.
Thank you. Is there a link between UDOT's RUC study and the CAV program?
Lisa, if you'd like, I'll take a first stab at that one and you can add on. All right. So in case anyone's not familiar with RUC, that's the road usage charge. And so this is also sometimes known as a VMT fee, but basically the idea is it's a usage-based payment. So it's pay per mile. And so it's not even a pilot program. This is in legislation. It's a live program that we're doing right now. And it has started with alternative fuel vehicles. And so we are setting up these systems so that we can track how many miles users have driven, and then they pay based on that. So I would say that the relationship between CAVs and road usage charge is probably less direct than the relationship between telematics and the road usage charge. Once telematics are in every vehicle, it's going to make it so much easier for us to collect data on how many miles have been driven. And we talked a little bit about security concerns. In most cases, the telematics are being collected by a third party. So it's not the government taking that information from people. So I think that there's an increased level of comfort there. It also gives us much more precise data about where people are driving. I think that that also opens the door for other potential policy levers, among them congestion pricing. All of these things are going to be so much easier to do with telematics. And so, yes, CAVs are definitely going to be great for making the road usage charge really viable and simpler than it is right now to administer. But I think telematics is probably the technology that's underlying that.
Thank you. And I would just like to turn it back to you both if you have any closing remarks as we are getting to the top of the hour for the attendees today.
I really just want to say thank you for the time. Thank you for those of you who tuned in, and go back to my message about all of us working together as a team. We really are an industry where we're all trying to work together and really purpose driven. When I go to conferences and when I go to other places and meet people in other industries, I just feel like I want to share with you my belief in the purpose of transportation because it's so great. I want you to have that too. So reach out. We've got so many opportunities to connect with each other on LinkedIn. You've got our contact information. You can go to our website. But as much as we can collaborate, I think we should, and I want to because it's fun. So thank you for the opportunity.
Let us geek out with all of you and share knowledge. We love it. We're very lucky to be very innovative at UDOT and have very good supportive leadership. So if there's anything that you're having a hard time getting through in your state or at your agency, please let us know, and we can certainly let you know if we've done it and if we have any pros and cons or tips. And certainly that messaging piece is very important. But thank you, everyone. This has been great.
Well, thank you, Lisa and Elizabeth, for today's member webinar, and thank you to our attendees for joining in. As I mentioned at the beginning, a copy of the recording will be posted to the ITSA website in the coming days, and thank you all for joining. Have a good day.